Before we begin our conversation with Terence Mauri, I wanted to give a little bit of an intro because he's a rock star. So, Terence Mauri is the founder of Hack Future Lab, best-selling author, and a leading management thinker who inspires leaders to shape the future with courage, purpose, and imagination. His thinking on how to thrive through disruption and how to win with empathy has been featured in The Economist, Forbes, New York Times, and Inc. His new book, The 3D Leader, Take Your Leadership to the Next Dimension, has been described as a game changer by MIT. Told you he was a rock star. So look forward to our conversation coming up. Hello all and welcome to another episode of Decoded. So excited because I have a thought leader and an author here with me today. Terence Mauri, who has just published a book. Can't wait to talk about it. But more than that, I love his philosophy on leadership and his take on how we can really adapt, evolve, and more importantly, lead in this crazy, new, topsy-turvy, but ultimately key moment in our world, in our lives. So, Terence, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us.
Abigail, it's an absolute pleasure to join you. Today, I want to give our audience the equivalent of a double espresso to excite their minds.
Ah, yummy. Can we put a little bit of vanilla syrup in it too or something?
Yes, let's do it.
Make it nice and sweet, nice and sweet. So, Terence, we met because we both love to talk about culture, about leading, about humanity. And I want to dig into your take on all of this through the lens of your new book.
Yes.
It's called 3D Leadership. And I just have to ask you, I love the name.
Thank you.
What does it mean to do things 3D? Were we doing things 1D, 2D, 5D? Tell us about that name.
It's such a great question. And I think for me, what drove the book was a question. I truly believe that questions are the answer. When uncertainty is high and volatility is high, when we're operating at the edge of uncertainty, what questions do we want to be remembered for? What's the bravest question we could ask? And for me, looking at leadership, I think the leadership model is broken. And I think it's well overdue for disruption. And what I mean by that is we're at this really exciting inflection point. We're going from money to meaning, economies of scale to economies of speed, hierarchies to networks. And so for me, this book really captures that zeitgeist. And I think we're at this incredible, exciting inflection point where there's an opportunity to not just return to business as usual, but reimagine a future that is agile, resilient, daring. And that's what the book is all about.
So that's
3D. 3D is about humanity. It's about elevating and scaling humanity. It's about prioritizing meaning. And it's about putting the human being at the front and center of your business model.
Oh, Terence, that is music to my ears.
Great.
I love that. You said so many juicy things that I have to decode all.
Yes, let's decode.
I know, let's go, let's dig. So you talked about from money to meaning, loving that. You talked about from the scale to speed, which totally believer of. And by the way, tell me if I'm wrong, but the kind of the thinking behind that is one of, you could fail if you go quickly, but that's okay. Is that kind of part of the thinking?
Look, speed, obviously, but human capital, financial capital, imagination capital, speed capital, these are absolutely important. But I think alongside that, failure and decoding failure as your source code for meaning, your source code for impact, your source code for insights, that comes with speed, and that's absolutely cool.
Yeah, that's absolutely cool. Oh, that's so awesome. There was another construct that you had. What was the third one?
So money to meaning.
Scale to speed.
Yes. I mean, there's quite a few different ones. So another one is hierarchies to networks.
Yes, hierarchies to networks.
Yes.
I have to say, that was a huge shift for me when I moved to Google, actually.
Mm.
And I'll never forget this. One of the great things about our process and how we work and our culture is that we often have one-on-ones with people. And it's very important to build your network inside Google, which, at the time sounded, you think of network, you think, oh, I want to build a network outside of my core job so that I can get a new job one day, right? But it was very much, it's very much part of our culture to continually engage and make sure that we're connecting with people. And there are various reasons to that, and I'm sure they're incorporated in your book. One of
yes.
which is you need to be able to mash different types of brains together to come up with original ideas. But the other thing but the reason this was such an interesting moment for me was that I had never met with this person before, and I'll never meet with this person again. We never
had
but it was this serendipitous, meetup. But he said to me something extremely important, which is, unlike most organizations, Google is a network-based organization, not a hierarchical one. And the reason that's so important is that immediately it came to light that there is no way you can do it on your own.
No.
That you have to rely on other people. You, as an individual, but also as a team, that you have to rely on other teams in order to succeed. And that notion, I think, is so powerful and so part of our DNA, and yet forgotten for decades, right?
It's been educated out of us, the education systems, and often the organizations as well, the way we're measured. Look, there's that saying, go alone, go fast, go together, go far. And right. I think it's this sort of new leadership imperative of the 21st century, which is ideas travel faster through networks and hierarchies. And actually we can hack bureaucracy with creativity and with intelligence. So in my book, I talk about ROI, not just return on investment, but ROI for me means return on intelligence, return on ideas. And that's a massive derivative when you've got a bunch of smart people working vertically and horizontally across cultures, where different cultures, different mindsets, different heart sets collide.
That's so awesome. And you also said something earlier too that just really got my hair sitting on end, or standing up on end, which was I think it was imagination capital.
Yes.
Right? Talk to us about that. I love that.
Well, look, there's an interesting study out of Stanford which looks at creativity and divergent thinking from the age of 4 to the age of 24. At the age of 4, the level of divergent thinking and creativity, it's around 98%. Basically, a child's brain is a supercomputer.
Totally.
But then every year, that number goes down. And because of the educational systems that we have in place, actually, failure is often a badge of shame, not a badge of honor. By the age of 24, most of that creativity has been killed off, and the score is an average of 4% creativity. As the late Sir Ken Robertson said, creativity is often educated out of us. And so I think one of the big challenges and opportunities for leaders is really how to scale daily courage in terms of creativity and create a culture where exploring and risk-taking and imagination is the norm, not a nice to have.
Amen. I mean, I can't speak more about that because this is what I do. This is what you guys do. I mean, the whole notion of being creative is not something that is just relegated to a few talented people. I mean, I think people sometimes think, oh, you have to be an artist to be creative, or you have to be a musician to be creative. But creativity is inherent in all of us, to your point. It's inherent in all of us because it's a product of divergent thinking. It's a product of connecting the neurons, right? And those synapses that fire up in our brains are these connections that we make. And obviously we know children synapse at a higher rate than adults, partly because their brains are forming, but also because they're exposed to so much more and they haven't learned to filter all of that out, because it's all interesting. It's all important, right?
It's such an exciting area of research for me, this idea of, what's the huge power of thinking like a kid for your whole lifetime?
Totally.
Because if we're lucky, we get to live for about 960 months, which is just 80 years of age, or 29,200 days. And my goal there is not to depress our listeners, but create this sense of urgency that we can waste so much energy. So in my book, I talk about the huge power of thinking like a kid, and also this idea of déjà vu. So déjà vu is where the unfamiliar feels familiar. In business and for leaders, you need to practice vu déjà. And vu déjà is flipping that model so you make the familiar unfamiliar. That could be your context, your competition, your industry, your customers, so you can identify those pain points or sources of friction. So vu déjà is asking those questions on a daily basis, new types of questions that shake up the status quo. Right.
So interesting. I love that twist on the words. And, actually implementing new language is so key, right? Because one of the things I learned, I studied anthropology, and Anthropology 101, you learn language is culture. And so much of the values and the belief and how people really think is embedded in the language we use. So if we can create new language, then people will actually start living it.
Language.
So that you took these languages and changed them.
It's music to my ears that you've said that, Abigail. I think language, it's the words you use, the expressions, the questions, they can reframe a context, or update the way that you see a problem or an opportunity, and they can truly help you scale the best version of yourself.
So let's talk about that. This
All right.
You've mentioned the word human and humanity, human capital, and how that's so much the thrust of your thinking and leadership. And what's also interesting, speaking of language, is a lot of the words you used are so fundamentally human and both seemingly obvious or seemingly expected, and yet not necessarily truly manifested by people. What I mean by that is you use words like being brave and being bold and taking risks, all those things that just seem like you don't have to go to business school to learn that, right? You don't have to be a brainiac to have those traits. They're so fundamental to the kind of human experience. But yet we have to remind people of that, because we've lost that. We've lost the feeling that we need to be like that, right?
I think, 99% of leaders are trapped in what I call the cult of accessibility, information overload, digital distractions, information obesity. And the research shows that as well. I visited a company in Silicon Valley. It's called Dopamine Labs. And its mission statement is to keep us glued to those apps. And so, time, often we're just stuck in a kind of fast operating mode of faster and faster. And so this book is really is a playbook for leaders to thrive. And it's a playbook for leaders to ask new types of questions. So for example, some of the big questions in the book are, how do we win with empathy? How do we balance empathy and economics, or cost and care? How do we win the race to reskill? How do we fight complexity, not with complexity, but with simplicity?
Right.
And I think the biggest question, which requires courage, is which old mindsets or operating models or assumptions about the world do we need to let go of?
Yeah. So let's go back to all, what I was mentioning before about being human and humanity. What is the one thing, if you had to pick one thing that we had to flip, one thing that we had to trigger, or, one thing to really kind of open leaders' minds to this notion of really going back to those fundamentals of human leadership, right? If we go back to hunter-gatherers, like what defined leadership in those days, to now, like what's the one thing that we can do to kind of really change people's behaviors and mindsets?
It's a critical question for our listeners to reflect on. And I believe it starts with empathy. So empathy, this sort of relatability, this connection, this compassion for our species. One of my favorite authors right now is Rutger Bregman, written the book Humankind.
Yep.
And I think, this is this is a really big takeaway, which is, what if we flip the metrics? If we had metrics for humility or kindness or generosity of spirit or connection or compassion, what type of society would we have then? Right. And so to answer your question directly, I think empathy, as Simon Sinek says, empathy is a language of leadership. And in fact, there's a great test you can do to test your empathy level. So next time you're going into an elevator, you go in and you see somebody walking towards you, maybe they're 30 yards away. Do you A, hit that button as fast as possible to close the elevator? Or do you B, keep it open for them? It's a really important way of testing your empathy.
Sure. That's such a great test, kind of behavioral economics, right? Right in front of you. So what does it mean then to really compete? Like, should we be thinking like that we're in competition with other people or companies?
This is another really interesting question, because I think, again, as a society, we can see these interesting inflection points. So, for example, blurring of industry lines, economic and geopolitical uncertainty, shrinking a company and product lifespans, and even job lifespans. And I think we're moving toward from me to we.
Right.
I call it, we need to move from this me model at an individual level, an organizational level, a society level, to a we model, a collaborative model. And I think that's how we can hack humanity with more shared prosperity and more inclusion. And this all comes down to also attention. So for me, empathy also means attention. So attention being the rarest and purest forms of generosity you can give to somebody else.
Attention, you mean really trying to see their sides, their worlds, and kind of what they need?
Exactly. So, different types of focus. So triple focus, I call it triple focus. So inner focus, I know myself.
Right.
Outer focus, I'm aware of people in my context. And then finally, other focus, which is those people, those stakeholders around you, those relationships.
Yep. Wow.
So this triple focus model to competition.
Yeah. I often use the image, because it's just so powerful to me, of the barn raising. And barn raising, it's impossible to do it by yourself. You cannot do it by yourself.
You cannot.
You must do it with others. And everybody probably leans into his or her capability, in terms of that process. And so coming back to a more collaborative model is not only going to make everybody happier and just more understanding, but it'll also reap rewards, as we're seeing. To me, that is just such a heartening concept. Especially and maybe it's only now, in this ridiculously harsh, topsy-turvy, we're living through a health pandemic, we're living through social pandemics, right? It's only probably now where we're ready, we're so ready to be
this open. Is a CEO said to me recently that this year's cancelled, and I replied, I disagree. I think this year is a once in a life opportunity to reinvent yourself.
Yes.
And actually, we're in this, what I call a liminal space.
Yes.
We're moving from one portal or gateway to another. And it's actually a chance for those who have the courage at the head and the heart level to actually scale a more humankind level of society and embed and bake that alongside our culture and alongside growth and profitability. Yeah. So, I'd love to see a kind of, let's place humanity at the center of our societies and organizations now and elevate it.
Right. And at the end of the day, who are we doing this for? We're doing this for human beings. I mean, just to geek out for a second. So in anthropology, liminality, to your point, is this stage. Often when you see cultures, particularly kind of earlier societies, when men and women pass through rites of passage, right? Men reach manhood, and it's often that they have to leave their society, undergo all these almost like hazing type of things, and come back transformed. And that's what we're experiencing. So
yes,
it all comes back to humanity. It all comes back to understanding, tapping our own sense of humanness, others' sense of humanness, and working together. I cannot think of a more hopeful message right now for business leaders and for any kind of leader. We all have it inside of us. We can all do it. We just have to go back to the fundamentals, which sounds seemingly easy, but it's not, but yet so critical. So
I had a talk from Mark Benioff at Salesforce recently.
Oh,
and he framed it really well. He said, look, we're moving from Purpose 1.0 to Purpose 2.0. Purpose 1.0 was about maximization of shareholder value, very narrow focus.
Yeah.
And really, The Economist was Milton Friedman, so it was using his logic. To Purpose 2.0, which is this sort of stakeholder capitalism. And what that means for our leaders and our listeners is continually reimagining relevancy. Not just focusing on money, but actually we're moving from money to meaning.
Yes.
And making sure that and also we're moving from ego to eco. So ego being ego to ecosystems. So it's no longer about ego, it's about eco. It's about we, not me.
Lovely. Oh my gosh, that's so wonderful to hear. Again, the idea that we can all be leaders, that it's all within us, that we have to, though, recognize these within us, open our minds, be brave, really capitalize on our sense of imagination, and reach out to others and work with others and be collaborative. It's such a wonderful message. So with that, thank you for helping actually instill a greater sense of purpose in me, which is to really push forward on this sense of humanness in all of us. So thank you, Terence. I welcome you back anytime to Decoded, and hopefully everyone will read 3D Leadership.
Thanks for having me, Abigail.
Speak to you soon. Bye.
Bye. Bye-bye.